high desert held its breath. 3 days without water had reduced Elias Crane's world to a shimmer of heat and the adobe silhouette of Santa Dolores Chapel. His parched lips cracked as he stumbled up the chapel steps, his academic credentials meaningless against the brutal arithmetic of dehydration. Inside, the noon mass paused as he collapsed before the altar, the congregation frozen in shock. Only one man moved net and stone bare, the Apache stonemason whose calloused hands had been rebuilding the bell tower for weeks. Without a word, he lifted the scholar's wasted frame and carried him out, past the priest's protestations, into the merciless sun. What ancient wisdom would compel a man to carry a dying stranger 40 miles across a scorched wasteland? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elias Crane had spent his life chasing water that no longer existed. At 58, his weathered face resembled the cracked earth he'd dedicated his career to studying. The rejection letter from the University of Arizona's tenure committee lay crumpled in his backpack, alongside his dwindling supplies. Insufficient practical applications. They had written of his life's work on ancient drought adaptation techniques. 3 weeks ago, he'd sat in his cramped office, surrounded by topographical maps and hydrogeological surveys, the letter crushed in his fist. Outside his window, Tucson baked under the relentless sun, breaking heat records for the 4th consecutive summer. The irony wasn't lost on him. A world increasingly desperate for water solutions had no place for a man who studied how ancient civilizations had survived similar catastrophes. "Dad, please reconsider," his daughter Rebecca had pleaded during their last phone call. "This expedition is foolish. There are other universities." "It's not about the tenure anymore, Becca," he'd replied, his finger tracing the faded Jesuit markings on a map he'd discovered in the university archives. These water maps could change everything. The mission records suggest an undiscovered aquifer. You've been chasing these theories for decades. Mom would have wanted you to retire, not die in the desert. Her voice had caught, the grief of her mother's passing still raw 3 years later. "Your mother understood what drives me," he'd said softly. "Some questions need answers." Rebecca had hung up. They hadn't spoken since. Now, as Elias staggered through the blistering heat, his canteen empty for 36 hours, he questioned his stubborn certainty. His research journal, once filled with meticulous notes, now contained increasingly disjointed observations. The last coherent entry, written yesterday morning, read simply, "Santa Dolores Chapel ahead. Water there." The chapel's bell tower had appeared as a mirage, wavering in the heat. His rational mind knew that the tiny mission outpost likely had minimal water reserves, but rationality had begun to abandon him along with his bodily fluids. The mission's historical records indicated that despite being built in an arid region, Santa Dolores had survived droughts that had decimated neighboring settlements. The Jesuits had documented a providence of waters that sustained them. Modern archaeologists dismissed this as religious hyperbole, but Elias recognized hydraulic engineering patterns consistent with other sites he'd studied. Dehydration played cruel tricks. As he trudged forward, he saw water everywhere, shimmering pools that vanished upon approach, streams that became sand between his fingers. His thoughts drifted to the Papago tribes, who had inhabited these lands for millennia before European arrival. Their water wisdom had kept them alive in conditions that defeated modern infrastructure. Follow the drought-resistant plants, his old mentor Professor Alvarez had taught him. They're nature's dowsing rods. But even the saguaros and creosote bushes looked withered in this unprecedented drought. The high desert was dying, and Elias feared he was simply documentation of its final gasp. The sun beat down mercilessly as Santa Dolores grew larger in his vision. The small adobe structure, with its modest bell tower under repair, represented his last hope. Scaffolding surrounded the tower where restoration work was underway. His academic mind made a final observation interesting, that someone would invest in preserving such a remote historical site during these desperate times. As consciousness wavered, his fingers brushed the leather cover of his research journal. Inside was everything he knew about water in the desert, a lifetime of research that might die with him under the merciless sun. The irony that he might perish from thirst while possessing knowledge that could save others wasn't lost on him. Chapel bells rang for noon mass, the sound rippling through the heat. Elias focused on this auditory lifeline and forced his legs to keep moving. Just a few hundred more yards. The adobe walls promised shade, if nothing else. Perhaps there would be water for a dying man. Perhaps there would be mercy. His academic credentials meant nothing now. His theories about historical drought adaptation were meaningless without the simple miracle of H.O. As Elias approached the chapel steps, the world narrowed to a single thought. Water. Nanton, Stone Bear's calloused hands, worked methodically in the pre-dawn darkness. Each morning for 62 years, he had greeted the sun with the same ritual blessing water before the day's heat stole its spirit. The small clay bowl before him contained his daily ration, precious drops that would sustain him through another day of rebuilding Santa Dolores Chapel's crumbling bell tower. "Grandfather of waters, mother of life," he whispered in Apache, his weathered face illuminated by the first hint of sunrise. "I honor what remains of you in this thirsty land." He had initially refused Father Ignacio's request to repair the chapel. His people had endured enough colonial monuments. But the old priest's argument had been compelling. The bell tower had been built by Apache hands in 1783, a forgotten collaboration between Franciscan missionaries and tribal stonemasons. The tower's unique design incorporated both Catholic and Apache water-gathering techniques, making it an unintentional historical record of shared knowledge. "Your ancestors' hands are in these stones," Father Ignacio had said. "Their wisdom is eroding away." So Nanton had agreed, bringing his grandfather's tools-worn mallets, chisels, and trowels that had shaped stone for generations. The leather tool roll, its surface darkened by decades of handling, contained implements fashioned from both modern steel and traditional materials. They represented the uncomfortable harmony between worlds that had defined Nanton's existence. From the scaffolding, Nanton could see far across the reservation lands. The drought had transformed once productive fields into dust bowls. Springs that had flowed since before written history had gone dry. Cattle carcasses dotted the landscape where ranchers had run out of water. The mining companies circled like vultures, offering cash for water rights to desperate families. The white man seeks ownership of what cannot be owned. His grandfather had told him decades ago, beside the hidden spring. They see water as property, not relative. Nanton lived alone in a small house at the reservation's edge, preferring the company of stone to people. The tribal council members called him the Old Bear, respected, but avoided for his direct manner and unwillingness to compromise with outside interests. Young Apache avoided him, uncomfortable with his strict adherence to traditions they found increasingly irrelevant, but they still came to him when their wells failed. He could find water in stone. It was a gift passed through his bloodline, a sensitivity to the earth's hidden veins that no geological survey could match. This talent had earned him both reverence and suspicion among his people. The knowledge of the hidden spring had been entrusted to him alone, the last reliable water source within 50 miles, unknown to government agencies or mining interests. The chapel bell rang for morning prayer, interrupting his thoughts. He ignored it. His agreement with Father Ignacio covered restoration work, not conversion. The stones themselves were his church dot. As Nanton mixed lime mortar, he noticed dust rising in the distance, a lone figure approaching from the east. Visitors were rare at Santa Dolores. especially on foot in this heat. Only desperation or foolishness would drive someone to walk these badlands. Another lost soul, he muttered. Through the heat haze, Nanton observed the stranger's uneven gait. A white man, academic type judging by the backpack and clothing, though those distinctions were fading under a layer of desert grime. The man's condition was clear, even at distant severe dehydration, likely past the point where judgment remained sound. Nanton frowned. The chapel's water cistern was dangerously low. The congregation barely had enough for themselves. This stranger would strain already limited resources. He returned to his stonework, but found himself glancing repeatedly at the approaching figure. Something about the man's determined struggle against impossible odds resonated with him. The desert was passing judgment, as it always did, revealing the true nature of those who challenged it. The desert gives 3 lessons his grandfather had taught him: humility, patience, and interconnection. Those who learn none die. Those who learn one survive. Those who learn all 3 find water even in stone. This stranger was about to learn something, one way or another. Santa Dolores Chapel had survived for nearly 3 centuries by existing between worlds. Nestled in a forgotten valley where reservation land met rancher territory, the adobe structure served as an unofficial neutral ground during the best of times. During the worst, like now, it became a lifeline. Father Ignacio Vega, 73, years old with arthritic hands and fading eyesight, had shepherded this dwindling flock for over 40 years. He stood in the chapel's small courtyard, watching Maria Vasquez distribute the weekly water ration to waiting families. 10 gallons. Per household, barely enough for drinking and cooking, nothing for crops or livestock. Father, the Herrera family hasn't come today, Maria noted, making a mark in her ledger. At 68, she had been the chapel's caretaker since her husband died 2 decades ago. Her institutional memory extended beyond living recollection. Her knowledge of local bloodlines and water rights invaluable. Roberto is too proud, Father Ignacio sighed. Check on them tomorrow. He fingered a faded photograph kept in his prayer book, a black and white image from 1943, showing his predecessor standing alongside Nanton's grandfather and several other Apache men before the newly rebuilt bell tower. The collaboration had been remarkable for its time, a brief moment when cultural knowledge was shared rather than suppressed. The mining representatives are coming again, Maria said, closing her water ledger. 3rd time this month. Phoenix Water Holdings, Father Ignacio muttered. Such a benign name for such insatiable thirst. The company had arrived 6 months ago, purchasing drought-bankrupted ranches and their water rights. Their test drilling, equipment operated day and night at the valley's eastern edge. Promises of jobs and prosperity accompanied every land acquisition, while water tables continued to drop at alarming rates. They offer to refill our cistern weekly if you'll endorse their presence from the pulpit, Maria reminded him. Water bought with lies brings no blessing, he replied. Beyond the chapel's adobe walls, the community's desperation grew. The Diaz family had sold their ancestral ranch last week. The White Feather clan was splitting water rations between 3 generations. Even the skeptical Baptists from the North Valley now attended Catholic Mass, drawn not by theological conversion, but by the chapel's reputation for finding emergency resources when all else failed. Jacob Miller, the last Anglo rancher holding, out against the mining interests, waited by the chapel gate. His once prosperous cattle operation had withered to a few dozen emaciated animals circling a dry stock pond. Any word on the county relief shipment? He asked Father Ignacio. Delayed again, the priest replied. Tucson has its own shortages. Miller nodded grimly. My great-grandfather survived the Dust Bowl, but this is worse. At least they had somewhere to migrate to. There's nowhere left to go. Miller glanced at the scaffolding, where Nanton worked silently. Why waste resources fixing a bell tower when people are dying of thirst? Some foundations must be maintained, Father Ignacio said, especially in the worst times. The chapel bells chimed noon, summoning the faithful to Mass. The congregation had swelled as the drought worsened, their prayers increasingly desperate. They filed in Apache tribal members, Hispanic ranchers, Anglo holdouts, their historical divisions temporarily suspended by shared crisis. Maria touched Father Ignacio's arm. "Look," she whispered, pointing eastward. A solitary figure staggered toward the chapel, silhouetted against the blinding sunlight. Even at distance, his lurching gait betrayed severe dehydration. "Another one," Father Ignacio sighed. "How many desperate souls can we help with our limited water?" "He won't make it to the steps," Maria predicted, her experienced eye measuring the man's condition. But somehow, the stranger kept moving, collapsing only after reaching the chapel's threshold. As Mass began, none noticed Nanton's gaze following the newcomer's progress, or the slight nod of recognition when the stranger finally fell. Elias no longer walked so much as fell forward repeatedly, catching himself just before hitting the ground. His empty canteen knocked against his hip like a hollow reminder of mortality. The sun had become a white hole burned through the fabric of the sky, neither rising nor setting, but omnipresent, all-consuming. Time stretched and contracted. Had he been walking for hours or days? The mission appeared and disappeared as heat mirages distorted his vision. Only the bell tower remained constant, a vertical line piercing the horizontal emptiness of the desert. His thoughts came in fragments. Rebecca's face, the tenure rejection, ancient Hohokam canals, the Jesuit water maps, his wife Sarah's funeral 3 years ago, the unnatural green of cemetery grass during the first summer of drought. "The body is 70% water," he mumbled to himself, his voice a papery whisper. "I am becoming a desert inside and out." The calculations had turned against him. His last water had been consumed yesterday morning, or was it the day before? The human body loses approximately 1 liter of water per day through respiration and transpiration alone. Add the exertion of walking in 110-degree heat, and the equation became lethal within 72 hours. His research journal, filled with meticulous notes from his journey, had devolved into increasingly incoherent scrawls. The last entry, barely legible, read, "Blue line on Jesuit map equals underground river? Santa Dolores knows." The chapel bells rang for noon Mass. The sound anchored him momentarily to reality. Just 50 more yards. People would be inside. Water would be inside. "Water follows geological logic," he whispered, reciting his own published thesis. "Human settlements follow water logic." The chapel steps loomed before him, 3 adobe risers that might as well have been a mountain range. Elias fought gravity, with each step his academic mind making a final observation that the slightly concave design efficiently channeled rainwater toward collection points, evidence of deliberate hydrological engineering. The heavy wooden door stood open. Cool air washed over him, the temperature differential momentarily shocking his system. Inside, rows of people sat on simple wooden pews, their backs to him as they faced the altar where Father Ignacio raised his hands in blessing. In nomen patris, et filii, et spiritus sancti ... double forward, disrupting the Latin cadence. Heads turned. Expressions of annoyance transformed to concern as his condition became apparent. He tried to form words, to explain his presence, his research, the importance of the Jesuit water maps. Instead, his parched throat produced only a rasp. Father Ignacio paused mid-blessing. "My son, are you?" Elias collapsed at the foot of the altar, his empty canteen clattering against the stone floor. The congregation gasped collectively. In the sudden silence, he managed to force a single word through his cracked lips. "Water." The world narrowed to a tunnel of fading light. Through it, Elias perceived a tableau of frozen responses. Father. Ignacio's outstretched hand. A woman clutching her rosary. A rancher half risen from his pew, uncertain whether to approach Dot, and then movement from the back of the chapel. A tall figure descending from scaffolding near the bell tower. An Apache man with weathered features and eyes that seemed to evaluate not just Elias's physical condition, but something deeper as, if measuring the volume of his soul rather than merely his level of dehydration. The man knelt beside him, calloused, fingers checking the pulse at Elias's neck. Their eyes met briefly. In that moment of connection, Elias felt strangely seen, not as a desperate stranger, but as something recognized. He needs more water than we have, the Apache man announced. His voice deep and certain. Father Ignacio stepped forward. We will share what little. No. The single word carried absolute authority. Your cistern is already too low for the community. Without further explanation, the man lifted Elias as easily as a child, one arm behind his shoulders, the other beneath his knees. Nanton, where are you taking him? Father Ignacio demanded. Elias felt himself being carried toward the door, his consciousness fading like water into sand. Nanton recognized death, walking long before the stranger reached the chapel steps. He had seen it before, the distinctive gait of severe dehydration, the forward momentum of pure will overriding a failing body. The Apache had a name for this state, walking with ancestor shadows. A man in this condition was already conversing with the dead. From his position on the bell tower scaffolding, Nanton had watched the academic's approach for hours. Something about this particular dying man had held his attention, perhaps the stubborn persistence, or the way the stranger occasionally stopped to examine the ground, even in his desperate state, not a lost tourist or misguided hiker. Something else. When the man finally collapsed during Mass, Nanton descended without hesitation. The congregation's immobility didn't surprise him. Modern people had forgotten how to act decisively in the face of death. They hesitated, looked to authority, waited for someone else to move first. Kneeling beside the fallen stranger, Nanton assessed his condition with experienced hands. Skin tenting severely when pinched. Rapid, thready pulse. Dry mucous membranes. Minimal sweat despite the heat, the body's final water conservation strategy before systems began to fail. Beyond these physical signs, Nanton sensed something his grandfather had taught him to recognize, a particular quality of desperation that went deeper than personal survival. This man was dying not just for himself, but for something he carried. The decision formed instantly. The chapel's water reserves barely. 20 gallons would not be enough. Trying to save him here would deplete the community's supply, while likely failing to save the stranger. The hidden spring was the only answer. He needs more water than we have, Nanton announced, already calculating what the journey would require. Father. Ignacio's offer to share the chapel's meager supply was predictable, the priest's kindness perpetually overwhelming his practicality. But the mathematics of survival were unforgiving. 20 gallons divided among 60 parishioners was already inadequate. Averting half to save one man would endanger many. No, Nanton said firmly. Your cistern is already too low for the community. He lifted the man, feeling the alarming lightness of his frame. At least 20 pounds of water weight already lost. The gourd water container hung at Nanton's side, its precious 8 ounces his daily ration. He would need to give the stranger small sips immediately once outside, then carefully measure consumption for the journey ahead. Nanton, where are you taking him? Father Ignacio's question carried the tension between trust and doubt that had always characterized their relationship. To water, Nanton replied simply. Maria Vasquez stepped forward, understanding dawning. In her eyes, the hidden spring, she whispered. It still exists? Nanton didn't answer. The less widely known, the safer the spring remained. The mining company had already destroyed 2 ancient seeps with their exploratory drilling. His grandfather's warnings echoed in his mind. Water knowledge is survival knowledge. Share it only with those who prove worthy. This is madness, Jacob Miller protested. The nearest reliable water is the reservoir in Tucson, 40 miles away. You can't carry a man that far in this heat. There is no water at Santa Dolores for him, Nanton stated flatly. He dies here or has a chance elsewhere. As Nanton carried the stranger toward the door, Father Ignacio made one final appeal. Let me send someone with you. Miguel has a truck. No. Vehicles where I'm going, Nanton interrupted. No companions. The stranger stirred slightly in his arms, eyes fluttering. Up close, Nanton noticed the man's hands calloused in places unusual for an academic. Working hands despite the scholarly appearance. The stranger's pack contained books and maps rather than typical hiking gear. A researcher, not a tourist. A seeker. The congregation watched in stunned silence as Nanton carried the dying man through the chapel doors into the blistering afternoon heat. Their expressions mixed concern with something else, the uncomfortable awareness that Nanton possessed. Knowledge they didn't. Access to water they couldn't reach. Pray for them both, Father Ignacio instructed as the door closed behind them. Outside, Nanton adjusted his grip on the unconscious stranger and turned east, away from all known water sources, into the most desolate stretch of the high desert. Journey had begun. The desert at midday was a furnace no sane man would willingly enter. Nanton moved with the deliberate efficiency of someone who respected heat as both adversary and teacher. Each step was placed with purpose, conserving energy. While maintaining steady progress eastward, the stranger remained unconscious, his breathing shallow but regular. Nanton had administered 3 carefully measured drops of water from his gourd container, placing them directly on the man's cracked lips. Not enough to rehydrate merely, to prevent immediate organ failure. Water is life, Nanton murmured in Apache, reciting his grandfather's teaching. But too much water too quickly, after great thirst, becomes death. He carried the academic across the cracked earth, past desiccated creosote bushes and cacti that had begun to consume themselves in desperate survival. The sun tracked westward with agonizing slowness. No clouds offered momentary respite from its glare. Heat radiated from the ground, surrounding them in a shimmering cocoon of superheated air. After 2 hours, Nanton paused beneath the scant shade of a stunted mesquite. He lowered the stranger carefully and extracted a weathered leather pouch from his pack. Inside was an ancient hide Navajo star map inherited from his maternal grandmother, its surface covered with intricate patterns of dots and lines, representing celestial navigation markers. The map contained no conventional landforms or directions. Instead, it recorded relationships between stars, shadows, and subtle ground markings. To untrained eyes, it appeared decorative rather than functional. To Nanton, it was more precise than any GPS. He oriented himself using the sun's position, and a distant mountain peak, confirming they remained on course toward the hidden spring. The journey would require 1 full night of travel, dangerous but necessary. Moving only by day would require more water than they had. The stranger stirred, eyelids fluttering. Don't try to speak, Nanton instructed, offering 3 more drops of water. Save your moisture. The man's eyes opened briefly intelligent, despite their confusion, then closed again. His fingers twitched, as if reaching for something. Nanton noticed the man's backpack for the first time, still strapped to his shoulders despite his condition. Whatever it contained had been worth preserving even as he approached death. Interesting. Nanton adjusted the pack more comfortably under the man's shoulders, but didn't remove it. A person's possessions were their own business, especially items they clung to while dying. As the afternoon heat intensified, Nanton returned to his practiced rhythm of carrying. His mind entered the meditative state his grandfather had taught, him aware of his surroundings while detached from discomfort. The weight in his arms became simply another reality to be accommodated. Neither burden nor inconvenience. The landscape changed subtly as they moved eastward. Microscopic variations in soil composition and moisture became apparent to Nanton's trained eye. Shallow depressions where water had once flowed, stone arrangements marking ancient paths. The high desert was a palimpsest of water history for those who knew how to read it. Twice, they passed survey stakes hammered into the ground metal pins with orange plastic flags bearing the Phoenix Water Holdings logo. The mining company's territory expanded weekly, their geologists using modern equipment to search for what Nanton already knew through traditional knowledge. The man stirred again near sunset, momentarily lucid. Where... He rasped, "To water." Nanton replied simply, "Rest, my research." The academic's hand moved weakly toward his pack. "Is safe," Nanton assured him. "As are you for now." The man's eyes fixed on Nanton with surprising intensity despite his condition. "The Jesuit maps," he whispered. "Santa Dolores. Underground river." Nanton's step faltered briefly, the first break in his measured pace since leaving the chapel. The stranger's words were unexpected. Few outsiders knew of the water system's true extent, and fewer still connected it to the old mission records. "Water first," Nanton said firmly. "Talk later." The sun touched the western horizon, painting the desert in blood orange and deep purple. Nanton adjusted his course slightly, using the fading light to identify a cluster of stones arranged in a pattern, meaningful only to those with specific knowledge. "Night travel now," he told the semi-conscious academic. "Cooler, faster." Behind them, the chapel bell tower had long since disappeared. Ahead lay miles of apparently barren wilderness. To anyone watching, their journey would seem like madness or a slow death march. But Nanton moved with absolute certainty toward a destination, invisible to modern maps. Dawn broke with merciful coolness. Nanton had walked through the night, navigating by stars and memory, stopping only twice to administer water to his charge. The academic's condition had stabilized, still critical, but no longer declining by the hour. As first light crept across the landscape, Nanton found what he sought: a shallow arroyo cutting through the desert floor, dry for decades, but once a seasonal watercourse. He lowered the stranger into a natural depression where the angle of the earth provided shade from the coming sun. "We rest here," Nanton announced, though unsure if the man could understand. To his surprise, the academic's eyes opened, clearer than before. "Where are we?" His voice was weak but coherent. "Halfway." Nanton offered his gourd water container, small sips only. "Your body will reject more." The man obeyed, taking 3 careful sips before handing back the gourd. "Elias Crane," he said, touching his chest weakly. "University of Arizona. Nanton Stone Bear." He didn't offer more information. Names were sufficient for now. Elias attempted to sit up, grimacing as his body protested. "The chapel, behind us," Nanton said. "Not enough water there for what you need. You're taking me somewhere else?" "A place with water." Elias squinted at the barren landscape. "Doesn't look promising. Most don't see what's here." Nanton gestured toward the ground. "This was once a river. It will be again." "Seasonal arroyo," Elias nodded, surprising Nanton with his recognition. "Flash flood channel." But no rain for years. He studied the terrain with professional interest. These formations suggest consistent water flow historically. Hydraulic erosion patterns, not just periodic flooding. Nanton reassessed his passenger, not just an academic, a water scholar. "You study water," Nanton stated. "Archaeohydrology, ancient water systems." Elias gestured weakly toward his backpack. Was researching Jesuit mission water management when he trailed off, embarrassed, miscalculated my supplies. A water scholar dying of thirst, Nanton observed without judgment. The desert teaches ironies. As the sun rose higher, Nanton extracted dried jerky from his small pack, offering a piece to Elias. Chew only. Don't swallow yet. Moisten in your mouth first. While Elias followed these instructions, Nanton surveyed their surroundings. 20 yards downslope, a metal stake protruded from the ground, its orange flag fluttering in the morning breeze. A mining company survey marker, barely visible among the rocks. Elias followed his gaze. Phoenix Water Holdings, he said, recognizing the logo. They're everywhere lately. Searching for what they don't understand, Nanton replied. Aquifer mapping, Elias nodded. Their geological surveys suggest significant underground water in this region. They've been buying up land and water rights across 3 counties. What? Do you know of them? Subsidiary of a multinational resource extraction corporation. They present as water conservation experts while actually securing extraction rights. Elias's academic precision returned as he spoke. They've depleted 2 watersheds in Nevada already. Nanton's expression remained impassive, but he noted the academic's knowledge with interest. Perhaps there was purpose in their meeting beyond simple rescue. How far to water? Elias asked. We'll reach the spring by nightfall. Spring? Elias looked genuinely surprised. Active surface water in this region? It's not on any geological survey or USGS map I've studied. Not everything is on maps, Nanton said simply. Elias fell silent, processing this information. After a moment, he reached for his backpack, hands still trembling with weakness. I've been researching water systems connected to Jesuit missions throughout the Southwest. Santa Dolores is mentioned in records from 1762 as having access to water, even during severe droughts. He extracted a worn leather journal filled with meticulous notes and sketches. The missions weren't built randomly. They followed existing indigenous water knowledge, often co-opting or building upon native systems. Some knowledge was shared. Willingly, Nanton corrected. Some taken. Yes, of course, Elias acknowledged. My research suggests a collaboration at Santa Dolores, a synthesis of Apache water wisdom and European engineering. Nanton studied the academic with new interest. Few whites acknowledged indigenous contributions to colonial infrastructure. The chapel's location makes no sense hydrologically, Elias continued, unless there's an underground source nearby. The records mention a sister spring that fed the mission through a hidden channel. Rest now, Nanton said, seeing fatigue overtaking the scholar. We move again when the sun passes midpoint. As Elias drifted into exhausted sleep, Nanton contemplated their conversation. The academic sought knowledge that Nanton's family had protected for generations. Yet his understanding of the mining company's threat suggested a potential ally rather than an exploiter. The desert would decide. It always did. By late afternoon, Elias could walk short distances, leaning heavily on Nanton. His recovery, while far from complete, impressed the Apache. Most men would remain incapacitated for days after such severe dehydration. Your body remembers water, Nanton observed as they navigated a narrow canyon. It knows how to use what little it receives. Field research, Elias explained between labored breaths. Spent 15 years studying water systems in arid environments. Yemen, Jordan, Peru. Body adapts? They paused where the canyon widened, revealing a rocky slope scattered with desert scrub. To untrained eyes, the landscape appeared random. To Elias, patterns emerged, subtle terracing, the remnants of ancient water harvesting techniques. Look, he said, pointing to a barely perceptible line running horizontally across the slope. Contour trenching. Indigenous water retention method. Nanton nodded, surprised again by the academic's perception. Apache technique. Captures rainfall. Slows erosion. Still functional after centuries, Elias noted with professional admiration. Modern systems fail within decades without maintenance. As they continued, Elias stopped suddenly, kneeling despite his weakness. Partially buried in the sand lay a fractured clay pipe, its design distinctive and ancient. "Ho'akum," he whispered, gently touching the artifact. Pre-Columbian irrigation system. I've only seen fragments like this in university collections. This entire region was once networked with such pipes, Nanton said. My grandfather showed me sections still intact beneath the surface. Elias looked up sharply. Intact sections? That would be archaeologically significant. The Ho'akum water management system was more sophisticated than the early Roman aqueducts, but less documented because the people who built it weren't white. Nanton finished matter --factly. Elias nodded, accepting the correction. Academic bias is real. My department funded 3 expeditions to study Greek cisterns, but rejected my proposal for indigenous water systems research. They continued in silence for a time, Elias's strength gradually improving with each careful water ration. The canyon narrowed again, its walls revealing stratified layers of geological history. Nanton moved with certainty, occasionally referring to landmarks invisible to Elias. How do you navigate here? Elias asked finally. There's no trail I can discern. Nanton gestured to the canyon walls. The stone speaks, if you know its language. Each pattern, each color change tells direction and distance. Like reading a map. Embedded in the landscape itself, Elias mused. Your maps separate people from land, Nanton replied. Our way keeps them connected. A sound interrupted them, the distant mechanical growl of heavy equipment. Nanton stiffened, pulling Elias into the shadow of a boulder. Mining operation, he whispered, pointing to a ridgeline where dust clouds arose. Phoenix Water Holdings, Elias surmised. Their permit applications mentioned exploratory drilling in this quadrant. They waited in silence until the noise subsided, then continued with greater caution. As they rounded a bend, the canyon opened into a broader valley. In the distance, silhouetted against the setting sun, stood a small group of modern buildings surrounded by drilling equipment. Regional headquarters, Elias identified. I attended a university symposium where their head geologist presented. They're mapping the entire aquifer system. For protection? Nanton's tone made the question rhetorical. For extraction, Elias confirmed. Their business model is predictable secure water rights during drought when prices are low, then control supply as scarcity increases. Nanton studied the academic thoughtfully. You understand their threat. Water is becoming more valuable than oil, Elias replied. My research shows that civilizations collapse when water management fails, not just physically, but ethically, when water becomes commodity rather than commons. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the Hinkau Valley. Nanton adjusted their course to avoid the mining camp, leading them through a nearly invisible gap between boulders. We'll reach the spring by morning, he said. Your strength returns at the right time. For what? Nanton didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, there are decisions ahead. The spring is not just water. It's knowledge, history. I won't betray its location, Elias promised. Academic ethics. Academic ethics, Nanton interrupted. Haven't protected indigenous knowledge before. Fair point, Elias acknowledged. So why risk taking me there? Nanton paused, looking back at the distant dust clouds from the mining operation. Because some threats require unlikely alliances. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. Nanton found a sheltered alcove for their night camp. With no fire to avoid detection, they huddled against the residual heat of sun-warmed stone. Rest, Nanton instructed. Tomorrow you'll see what few outsiders have ever witnessed. Elias nodded, pulling his journal from his pack. With your permission, I'd like to document the ancient water management techniques we've observed. Not locations, just methods. Nantan considered this request, then nodded once. Knowledge preserved properly can serve future generations. In the fading light, Elias began to sketch the fractured clay pipe with surprising accuracy given his age. Still trembling hands, they reached the abandoned mission outpost as twilight painted the desert in deepening purples. Unlike Santa Dolores, this structure had surrendered to time, its adobe walls partially collapsed, its small bell tower a jagged silhouette against the darkening sky. Only the chapel remained somewhat intact, its thick walls still standing after 2 centuries of neglect. San Miguel de los Aguajes, Elias identified, his academic knowledge surfacing even through exhaustion. Established 1767, abandoned 1779. Not on most historical registers. The Jesuits left in haste, Nantan added, after they discovered something the church deemed dangerous. Elias looked at him with surprise. The historical record indicates disease or Apache raids as the reason for abandonment. History is written by those who can write, Nantan replied simply. They entered the roofless chapel cautiously. Desert creatures had claimed lizard tracks crisscrossed the dusty floor, and a barn owl watched from a niche once meant for a saint's statue. Despite its dilapidation, the space retained a certain reverence, as if centuries of prayers had seeped into the very stones. Nantan moved with purpose toward the altar area. Unlike the rest of the structure, the stone altar remained relatively intact. He knelt beside it, fingers probing the weathered surface. "Help me move this," he instructed. Together, they shifted the heavy stone slab a few inches, revealing a small cavity beneath. Nantan reached inside and extracted an object wrapped in preserved animal hide. Mission outposts served multiple purposes, he explained, unwrapping the package. Religious conversion was only one. Inside lay a tarnished silver cross, approximately 8 inches tall. Unlike typical crucifixes, this one featured unusual engravings, lines, and symbols that resembled neither standard Christian iconography nor Spanish text. Elias leaned forward, professional interest overcoming fatigue. "May I?" Nantan hesitated, then handed him the cross. Elias examined it carefully, fingers tracing the strange markings. "I've seen similar symbology in Jesuit archives," he said. "They developed coded communications during their expulsion from New Spain. But these markings are different, more precise, almost like ... double quotes, measurements," Nantan finished. "Water measurements." Elias looked up sharply. "You know what this is?" "My grandfather showed me one similar. He called it the water cross. It contains information about underground waterways." Elias turned the cross over, discovering a small mechanism on the back. With careful manipulation, a hidden compartment clicked open, revealing a tightly folded piece of parchment. "Extraordinary," he whispered, handling the fragile document with reverent care. A hidden hydrological map disguised as a religious artifact. The parchment contained intricate drawings of what appeared to be underground water channels, marked with symbols matching those on the cross itself. Names in faded ink labeled various points, some in Spanish, others in what Elias recognized as Apache. "This confirms my research hypothesis," he said, voice quickening with excitement. The Jesuits weren't just converting Apaches, they were learning from them, documenting indigenous water knowledge while hiding it from Spanish authorities. Not all knowledge was taken by force, Nantan acknowledged. Some priests earned trust, learned respectfully. This map section, Elias pointed to the parchment's eastern edge, corresponds to the area where Santa Dolores was built. And these markings indicate a significant underground water source, exactly where my research suggested. The sister spring, Nanton confirmed, using Elias's earlier term. Their eyes met in mutual recognition of the document's significance. For Elias, it represented historical validation of theories the academic community had dismissed. For Nanton, it confirmed the wisdom passed through generations of his family. My grandfather spoke of Jesuit priests who recorded our water knowledge in their own symbols. Nanton said, carefully rewrapping the cross. He believed they meant to protect the information, not steal it. From whom? Elias asked. Spanish mining. Interests, Nanton replied. Even then, those who sought wealth saw water only as a tool for extraction. 250 years later, and the same battle continues. Elias observed grimly. As night fully descended, they made camp within the mission ruins. Elias's strength had improved enough that he could gather firewood while Nanton prepared. A small, sheltered fire pit designed to minimize visible light. Why show me this? Elias asked as they sat beside the flames. Why trust an outsider with knowledge your people have protected for generations? Nanton stared into the fire. The drought changes everything. Old ways of protecting alone may no longer serve. And you nearly died pursuing this knowledge that suggests commitment beyond academic curiosity. Or foolishness, Elias added with self-deprecating honesty. That too, Nanton agreed, the faintest smile briefly crossing his usually stoic features. We'll determine which tomorrow when we reach the spring. Dawn found them moving through increasingly rugged terrain. The desert floor gave way to ancient volcanic formations, jumbled basalt columns, and weather-sculpted lava flows that had cooled millennia ago. Vegetation changed subtly, with more juniper and pinyon pine, suggesting slightly higher elevation. Elias moved under his own power now, though still weakened. 3 days ago, he had faced certain death. That he walked at, all seemed miraculous, a testament to Nanton's careful water rationing and the human body's resilience. The air feels different, Elias noted, his academic mind cataloging environmental changes. Higher humidity. We approach the watershed boundary, Nanton confirmed. Where surface appears most barren, underground water often flows strongest. They paused at a ridgeline overlooking a vast basin. In the distance, dust clouds marked the location of multiple drilling operations. Trucks moved along dirt roads connecting the sites, their movements purposeful and methodical. Phoenix Water Holdings has accelerated their timeline, Elias observed. When I began my research 4 months ago, they had only 2 exploratory permits. They sense water, Nanton said grimly, like predators scenting blood. A gust of wind brought something unexpected, a sheet of paper tumbling across the desert floor. Elias caught it as it fluttered past, unfolding a corporate document with the Phoenix Water Holdings logo. Water rights acquisition contract, he identified, scanning the legal terminology. Draft version, probably blown from a survey team's vehicle. The document detailed water claims extending far beyond current drilling sites. Comprehensive plan to secure rights throughout the entire watershed, including reservation land and historical chapel properties. They're creating a monopoly, Elias explained, his professional knowledge of water law surfacing. Once they control enough water rights, they can effectively dictate terms to the entire region. Nanton studied the paper, his expression darkening. Your laws allow this? American water law is complicated, Elias sighed. Based on outdated concepts like prior appropriation and beneficial use, it privileges extraction and development over conservation or traditional use. Water is property rather than relation, Nanton nodded. As my grandfather predicted, these claims include Santa Dolores Chapel, Elias noted with concern, and extend to areas not yet publicly mapped for water potential. They have inside information, Nanton concluded, perhaps from government surveys. Elias folded the document carefully and stored it in his pack, evidence of their intentions. could be useful. They continued through increasingly difficult terrain, forced to detour around areas where mining operations had altered the landscape. Helicopter sounds occasionally echoed across the basin aerial surveys, mapping the region with advanced technology. Their methods versus ours, Nanton observed as they watched a helicopter pass overhead, carrying sophisticated ground-penetrating radar equipment. They spend millions to find what traditional knowledge has always known. Different epistemologies, Elias agreed. Western science often rediscovers indigenous knowledge, but calls it discovery, and charges for what was once freely shared. Nanton added, as they descended into a narrow canyon. Elias broached a question that had lingered since their departure from the chapel. The spring we're heading toward, it's not on any government survey or geological map. No, yet it sustained your people through previous droughts. Yes. How has it remained undocumented in an era of satellite imagery and geological surveys? Nanton stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Not all water flows where expected. Not all knowledge is visible to those who lack proper perspective. The cryptic answer might have frustrated Elias before, but 3 days in Nanton's company had taught him patience. The Apache's knowledge operated on different principles than academic research, no less valid, but accessed through different pathways. They rested briefly in the shade of a canyon wall. Elias removed his journal, making careful notes about their route and the water management features they'd observed. His academic training compelled documentation, though he deliberately omitted specific locations or identifying features that might compromise the spring's secrecy. Your words preserve knowledge one way, Nanton acknowledged, watching him write. My people preserved it through stories, songs, and direct teaching, both vulnerable in their own way, Elias replied. Books can burn. Elders can die before passing knowledge completely. This is why the Jesuits and my ancestors created the Watercross, Nanton said. 2 knowledge systems protecting the same wisdom. As afternoon heat peaked, they spotted a helicopter hovering over a site less than a mile from their position. Even at distance, they could see the drilling equipment being unloaded Phoenix water holdings, expanding their operation. They get closer, Nanton observed gravely. We must reach the spring by nightfall. Will we? Elias asked, noting the substantial distance still to cover. If the water wishes to be found, Nanton replied, we will find it. The canyon narrowed until they walked single file between towering walls of striated sandstone. Shadows deepened as the sun moved westward, casting the passage in premature twilight. The temperature dropped noticeably, bringing welcome relief after the day's heat. We're close, Nanton said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Elias noticed changes in the stone walls, subtle at first, then increasingly evident. Human markings appeared, ancient petroglyphs carved into the desert varnish that coated the rock faces. He slowed his pace, professional fascination overtaking fatigue. These are remarkable, he murmured, examining symbols that combined animal forms with abstract patterns. Multiple cultural layers. Some appear pre-Apache, possibly ancestral Puebloan. The oldest are from the ancient ones, Nanton confirmed, before any tribes currently named. The petroglyphs became more numerous as they progressed, eventually, covering entire sections of the canyon walls. To an untrained observer, they might appear decorative or religious shamanic imagery and hunting scenes typical of southwestern rock art. But Elias recognized hydrological information encoded within the apparent randomness. These spiral patterns indicate underground water movement, he said, pointing to a series of connected circular designs. And these wavy lines show seasonal variation in flow. My research team documented similar encoding systems in Yemen's ancient water management glyphs. Nanton studied him with renewed interest. Few outsiders recognize the water wisdom in these markings. Water leaves records in both geology and human communication, Elias replied. "I've spent my career learning to read both languages." I reached a section where the petroglyphs formed a comprehensive panel nearly 20 feet long. Centered. Among the ancient markings was a distinctive symbol, a complex arrangement of lines and dots that Elias immediately connected to the patterns on the Jesuit cross. The Jesuits copied these symbols, he realized, translated them into their own coding system. Yes, Nantan confirmed. My grandfather called this wall the Water Bible. It records 5,000 years of drought cycles and water knowledge. Elias approached reverently, his fingers hovering near, but not touching the sacred markings. Academic archaeology has misinterpreted these patterns for decades. We classified them as ceremonial or astronomical, missing their practical hydrological function. They are both, Nantan corrected. Water knowledge is both practical and spiritual. The separation exists only in modern thinking. As sunlight struck the panel at a low angle, previously invisible markings appeared, pigments that remained reactive to light centuries after application. The effect revealed an additional layer of information, showing how surface formations connected to underground water channels. Ingenious, Elias whispered. A solar calendar linked to hydrological data, visible only at specific times of day and year. Knowledge protected by nature itself, Nantan agreed, revealed only to those patient enough to observe through changing seasons. Elias thought of the sophisticated ground-penetrating radar equipment. The mining company deployed technology that cost millions yet might miss connections obvious to those who understood these ancient records. My grandfather brought me here as a boy, Nantan said, his usual stoicism softening with memory. We slept 7 nights beneath these markings. Each day, as light changed, he explained different aspects of water wisdom. A living transmission of knowledge, Elias nodded. More comprehensive than any academic paper. He said knowledge kept only in one form becomes fragile, Nantan continued. The Apache remembered through stories and teaching. The stone remembered through these markings. The Jesuits remembered through their maps and crosses. Together, the knowledge survived centuries. Elias thought of his own research, locked in academic journals read by few and understood by fewer. How much wisdom had been lost through institutional arrogance and disciplinary silos? As they prepared to continue, Elias noticed darker markings on some rocks near the ground, not ancient, but recent. He knelt to examine them and recognized petroleum residue. Oil traces, he identified with concern. Recent contamination within the past few months. Nantan's expression hardened. The drilling operations are affecting groundwater already. The contamination follows underground channels. They exchanged worried glances, the implication clear. If pollutants had reached this area, the hidden spring might already be compromised. We must hurry, Nantan said. The canyon widened gradually, opening to a broader valley flanked by eroded mesas. As sunset approached, a natural amphitheater of stone appeared before them. At its center stood a circle of ancient junipers. There, gnarled trunks testifying to centuries of slow, persistent growth. The guardian trees, Nantan said. They grow nowhere else in this region. Their roots reach the deep water. Elias felt a shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Higher humidity, the faintest scent of moisture. After days in the desert's parched emptiness, the change was profound. The spring is within that circle of trees, Nantan said. We'll arrive at sunset, the proper time for first approach. As they moved toward the juniper grove, Elias sensed they approached not just water, but a threshold between worlds, the academic theories he had pursued his entire career, and the living knowledge Nantan embodied. The hidden spring revealed itself. Gradually, as they entered the circle of ancient junipers, the ground beneath their feet changed from parched earth to soft moss. The air grew noticeably cooler and moister. Sounds dampened, creating an atmosphere of reverent quiet broken only by the whisper of leaves. It appears small, Nanton explained as they approached the center, but its importance cannot be measured by surface size. In the heart of the grove lay a pool no more than 10 feet across. Unlike the stagnant catchments Elias had observed elsewhere, in the drought-stricken region, this water moved a gentle bubbling at the center, indicating active flow from below. The surface reflected the sunset's golden light, creating an otherworldly glow. Artesian pressure, Elias observed with academic appreciation. The aquifer must be substantial to maintain flow during such an extended drought. The spring is the visible child of a much larger parent, Nanton agreed. What you call an aquifer, my people name differently, the womb of waters. Elias knelt beside the pool, professional habits momentarily overtaking reverence. He reached toward the water, then paused, looking to Nanton for permission. The water welcomes respectful touch, Nanton assured him. The coolness against Elias's fingers felt miraculous after days of heat and thirst. He cupped his hands, bringing water to his lips with careful gratitude. The taste held subtle mineral notes, calcium, magnesium, trace elements he could identify from years studying water chemistry. This isn't just any aquifer, he said, scientific. Understanding dawning. The mineral profile suggests ancient water, possibly predating the current geological era. This could be Paleolithic groundwater, thousands of years old. The oldest living water, Nanton nodded. What your science recently discovers, our stories have always known. As Nanton performed a brief water blessing at Apache, Elias circled the spring, examining the surrounding geology. The rock formation suggested a complex system faults and fractures allowing deep water to reach the surface. Against gravity's pull, near the pool's eastern edge, something caught his eye, a small metallic glint among the rocks. Curiosity piqued. He investigated and discovered a weathered metal box wedged between two boulders. The container was clearly man-made, but old, its surface corroded by decades of exposure. Nanton, he called, did you know about this? The Apache approached, genuine surprise crossing his normally impassive features. No, this wasn't here when I last visited. Together they worked the box free from its resting place. Though weathered, its seal had held, protecting whatever lay inside from the elements. The lid bore no markings or lock, simply a tight-fitting design that had kept water and air at bay. With careful movements, Elias opened it. Inside lay a single envelope, the paper yellowed but intact, preserved by the box's tight seal. On its face, written in faded ink, were two names, John Stonebear and Professor Miguel Alvarez. Nanton stared at the envelope, his stoic demeanor cracking visibly. John Stonebear was my grandfather. Elias felt an electric shock of recognition. Miguel Alvarez was my doctoral advisor at the university, my mentor. Their eyes met in shared astonishment as the implications settled between them. Their paths had not crossed by accident. The connection between them predated their meeting at Santa Dolores Chapel. With reverent care, Nanton opened the envelope and extracted a letter dated June 12, 1972. The handwriting alternated between two distinct style sections in English, followed by responses in a different hand. A correspondence, Elias realized, between your grandfather and my mentor. They read in silence, the letter revealing an extended dialogue between the Apache waterkeeper and the academic hydrologist. The men had met when Professor Alvarez conducted field research on the reservation in the early 1970s. Unlike most outside researchers, Alvarez had approached with respect, seeking permission before studying tribal lands. The letter documented their growing friendship and shared concern about water exploitation in the region. Most surprisingly, it outlined a mutual pact to protect the hidden spring and its connected aquifer system from corporate interests that had begun exploring the area even 50 years prior. My grandfather never mentioned this partnership, Nanton. sighed, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Nor did Alvarez, Elias added, though he constantly emphasized indigenous knowledge in his teaching. The letter's final paragraph, written in John Stonebear's hand, struck them both deeply. If you are reading this, either my grandson or your student has found their way here. The spring chose them as it chose us. The knowledge must continue. Through their hands now, as the fight for water will only grow more desperate in the years to come. What we began together, they must continue. The sun disappeared below the horizon as they finished reading, casting the spring in deepening twilight. The water's surface seemed to glow with its own inner light. Not coincidence, Nanton said finally. No, Elias agreed. Something much more significant. Night descended fully as they processed the revelation. Stars emerged in breathtaking profusion, the Milky Way arcing overhead like a luminous river, a celestial mirror to the hidden waters beneath. Their feet. The letter changes things, Nanton said finally, breaking the contemplative silence. It validates what both of us have separately pursued, Elias agreed. Academic research and traditional knowledge converging on the same truth. Nantan moved to a large boulder near the spring's edge. What Elias had assumed was natural stone formation revealed itself, under Nantan's knowing hands, to be partially work-shaped by human intention centuries ago. With careful precision, Nantan pressed specific points in sequence. A section of the boulder shifted, revealing a hollow space within. My grandfather showed me this place when I was 12, Nantan explained, reaching into the cavity. I've never shown another person. He withdrew an object wrapped in preserved hide similar to the covering that had protected the Jesuit cross. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a complete Jesuit water map, far more extensive than the fragment they had discovered at the abandoned mission. The complete hydrological system, Nantan said, spreading the document on a flat stone. Updated by my grandfather and Professor Alvarez in the 1970s. Elias studied the map with professional wonder. It detailed an extensive underground water network connecting multiple springs, identifying geological features that facilitated water movement through seemingly impermeable rock. The precision exceeded modern hydrogeological surveys, combining observational data with generational knowledge. This is extraordinary, he whispered, recognizing the synthesis of indigenous wisdom and scientific notation. The Jesuit cartographic style combined with Apache water knowledge, updated with modern hydrological terminology. Together, they examined the map's details. The Santa Dolores Chapel appeared near the western edge, positioned above what the map identified as an underground channel connected to the spring system. East of their current location, the map showed a larger underground reservoir, what Nantan had called the Sister Well. This explains why Santa Dolores survived droughts that decimated other settlements, Elias realized. The chapel was deliberately placed above this water channel. My ancestors guided that placement, Nantan confirmed. A gesture of cooperation during conflict-filled times. As they traced water pathways across the map, Elias noticed disturbing implications. The mining company's drilling operations, based on locations they had observed during their journey, intersected critical junctures in the aquifer system. They're drilling directly into connection points, he said with growing alarm, places where water channels converge. Nantan nodded grimly. They found part of the system through their technology, but without understanding its integrated nature, their extraction methods will collapse entire sections. Elias's scientific mind calculated potential consequences. If these channels are as ancient as I suspect, disrupting them could permanently alter the hydrogeology of the entire region. These aren't renewable on human timescales. Once damaged, they might take thousands of years to recover, if ever. The spring already shows signs, Nantan said, moving back to the water's edge dot in the starlight. Elias hadn't noticed what became evident as Nantan directed his attention. a faint iridescent sheen on portions of the spring's surface. He dipped a finger at the edge, bringing it to his nose. Petroleum contamination, he confirmed. Trace amounts, but present. The drilling introduces chemicals that follow the same pathways as water, Nanton explained. What they release miles away arrives here through underground channels. The implications settled heavily between them. The spring that had sustained life for millennia, that had just saved Elias from certain death, was itself now threatened. Our mission has changed, Elias said, understanding dawning. I came seeking historical knowledge about water systems. You rescued me out of humanitarian necessity, but now we must rescue the water itself, Nanton finished. Elias studied the map again, his academic mind shifting to problem-solving mode. The contamination is still minimal. If the drilling operations could be halted before they penetrate deeper into the system, the spring alone cannot be saved if the larger system is poisoned, Nanton said. All parts connect, what your science calls a watershed, what our stories describe as the body of water beings. We need to protect the entire aquifer, Elias agreed, which means confronting Phoenix water holdings directly. With what authority? Nanton asked. Corporations understand. Only money and law. Elias considered the question thoughtfully. We have something potentially more powerful, irrefutable evidence, combining traditional knowledge and scientific documentation. This map, together with water chemistry analysis and the contamination already present, creates a compelling case for immediate intervention. The tribal council has refused to challenge the mining operations directly, Nanton said. Too many promises of jobs and economic development. And the local communities around Santa Dolores are divided, Elias added. Some have already sold water rights out of financial necessity. They fell silent, the magnitude of their challenge becoming clear. Two men against a multinational corporation with seemingly unlimited resources and legal advantages. We start by documenting everything, Elias decided finally. Gather evidence of contamination, map the drilling sites in relation to the water system. Build a case that even corporate lawyers can't dismiss. Nanton carefully rewrapped the map. We begin at sunrise. Tonight, we rest beside the spring that brought us together across generations. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor hues as Elias collected water samples from various points around the spring. His movements were methodical, each file carefully labeled with location, time, and visual observations. 4 days ago, he had been dying of thirst. Now he worked with renewed purpose, his academic training channeled toward urgent practical application. These samples will provide baseline contamination data, he explained as Nanton prepared for the return journey. Even trace hydrocarbon presence in this pristine system constitutes evidence of environmental damage. Nanton nodded, watching the academic work with newfound respect. The scholar he had rescued had transformed from a dehydrated liability into a potentially valuable ally. Elias possessed knowledge of scientific protocols and legal frameworks that complemented Nanton's traditional understanding. The mining company will have environmental impact studies, Nanton observed. Documents claiming their operations cause no harm. Almost certainly falsified or deliberately limited in scope, Elias agreed. They'd have tested water sources already, on government maps, not hidden springs unknown to regulatory agencies. He carefully packed the water samples in his backpack, cushioning them between layers of clothing. They represented crucial evidence, physical proof of contamination that couldn't be dismissed as mere theory or traditional belief. Their return route differed from their inbound journey. Rather than avoiding mining operations, they now moved deliberately toward them, documenting each site they encountered. Elias's journal filled with precise notations, GPS coordinates, drilling depths, visible on equipment, types of chemicals stored on site. Phoenix Water Holdings operates under minimal oversight, Elias explained as they observed a drilling operation from a concealed position. The drought emergency has led to expedited permits with reduced environmental requirements. Desperation. Exploited, Nanton summarized. Exactly. When communities are dying of thirst, long-term water protection seems less urgent than immediate supply. By midday, they had documented 3 active drilling sites that directly intersected with aquifer, channels shown on the Jesuit map. The pattern became clear. The company had somehow identified key nodes in the underground water system, but lacked understanding of their interconnected nature. Their geological surveys found the main water deposits, Elias noted, but they're treating them as isolated pockets rather than a living system. Like removing organs without understanding the body. Nanton agreed. At the largest site, they observed trucks unloading equipment for what appeared to be permanent infrastructure, the transition from exploration to active extraction. Workers in company uniforms moved with purpose, setting concrete foundations for pumping stations. They're accelerating operations, Elias whispered as they watched from behind a ridge, moving from testing to production phase. How soon before they reach the main aquifer? Elias calculated based on drilling rates and depths. At current pace, they could penetrate the primary chamber within 2 weeks. And once breached, contamination becomes irreversible. The entire system could be compromised within months. They retreated to a safe distance before continuing their documentation. As they traveled, they encountered further evidence of the company's expanding present survey stakes, marking future drilling sites, soil test locations, even road grading for improved access. Near a dry stream, they discovered a campsite, recently abandoned by company surveyors. Among discarded food wrappers and empty water bottles, the irony not lost on either man, lay a crumpled document. Elias retrieved and carefully smoothed it, revealing a corporate environmental impact study. Their official assessment, he confirmed, scanning the technical language, claiming negligible hydrological impact and no significant underground water resources at risk. Deliberate lies? Selective truth, Elias clarified. They've documented only what regulations require surface water impact, not deep aquifer effects. Technically legal, but ethically bankrupt. He photographed each page with his phone's camera, creating digital backup of the evidence. Though battery power was limited, he prioritized documentation over conservation. As afternoon waned, they approached a ridge overlooking the valley, containing Santa Dolores Chapel. From this elevation, the scope of Phoenix Water Holdings' operation became fully apparent, a sprawling network of sites strategically positioned across the watershed. The chapel stood as a tiny adobe island amid an industrial sea. They've surrounded the entire water system, Elias observed grimly. A coordinated encirclement. Nanton's expression hardened. War strategy. Cut off resources, isolate resistance, then consume. The distant sound of helicopter rotors interrupted their conversation. Both men instinctively sought cover as an aircraft. Bearing the Phoenix Water Holdings logo, appeared over the adjacent ridge. It hovered briefly, conducting aerial survey, then continued westward. Our timeline just compressed, Elias said as they watched it disappear. That's a magnetometer survey. They're mapping the entire aquifer system from the air. How much time remains? Days, not weeks, Elias calculated. Once they have the aerial data correlated with ground surveys, they'll pinpoint the main aquifer chambers. Nanton gazed toward the distant chapel, its bell tower catching the late afternoon sun. We must reach Santa Dolores by tomorrow. Father Ignacio must be warned. The tribal council must be informed. We'll need more than warnings, Elias cautioned. We need a unified response from all stakeholders, the chapel community, tribal authorities, even remaining ranchers. Divided resistance will fail. As shadows lengthened across the valley, they began their descent, each step bringing them closer to a confrontation neither had anticipated when Nanton carried a dying stranger from the chapel 4 days earlier. They reached the outskirts of the reservation by midnight, moving through darkness with Nanton's confident guidance. At a weathered trail marker visible only to those who knew its significance, they paused to consider their strategy. "We must divide our efforts," Nanton said, his normally impassive face showing rare urgency. "The tribal council meets at dawn. I must be present." Elias nodded. "I'll continue to Santa Dolores. Father Ignacio can help gather the chapel community and remaining ranchers. The water samples and documentation? I'll organize the evidence and prepare a presentation that combines scientific data with the historical records." Elias hesitated, then added, "Will the tribal council listen? You mentioned their reluctance to challenge the mining operations." Nanton's expression darkened. "They fear economic repercussions. Phoenix Water Holdings has promised jobs, infrastructure improvements, regular water deliveries. These are powerful incentives during desperate times. But the contamination evidence will help, but may not be sufficient." Nanton gazed toward the distant glow of reservation lights. "My people have heard promises of environmental protection before, only to witness continued exploitation. They confirmed plans to reconvene at Santa Dolores by afternoon, allowing Elias time to organize evidence while Nanton addressed the tribal council. As they prepared to separate, Nanton reached into his pack and withdrew the ancient star map. "Take this," he said, offering the precious artifact to Elias. "It shows water paths that connect to Santa Dolores. Combined with your samples and the Jesuit cross, it completes the historical record." Elias accepted the hide map with appropriate reverence. "I'll safeguard it alongside my research." "Our research now," Nanton corrected. They parted ways beneath the vast desert sky, each carrying pieces of their shared evidence toward different audiences. Morning found Elias at Santa Dolores Chapel, explaining his miraculous survival and urgent mission to an astonished Father Ignacio and Maria Vasquez. The chapel's small office became an impromptu laboratory as he arranged water samples, maps, and documentation across the aged wooden table. "The mining company has already scheduled a community meeting here tomorrow," Father Ignacio informed him. "Their representatives are presenting final plans for what they call comprehensive water resource development." "Perfect timing," Elias replied. "We'll have all stakeholders present." "But you're proposing to challenge a powerful corporation with just these samples and old maps," Maria observed worriedly. "They'll have lawyers, technical experts, government permits." "We have something more powerful," Elias assured her. "Irrefutable evidence of an interconnected water system that precedes modern property law, with documented contamination already occurring." As word spread of Elias's return and Nanton's expected arrival, the chapel became a gathering point for curious and concerned community members. Jacob Miller, the rancher who had questioned Nanton's decision days earlier, arrived with several neighboring landowners. "Is it true?" he demanded. "There's a natural spring that survived the drought?" "Yes," Elias confirmed. "But it's already showing contamination from drilling operations. And it's connected to water under your own ranches through ancient channels." Miller examined the Jesuit map with growing comprehension. "This matches patterns. My grandfather documented places where grass remained green even during the Dust Bowl years. We always assumed they were random." "Not random," Elias explained. "Part of an ancient system that indigenous people understood centuries ago." As he organized the scientific evidence, Elias prepared a formal declaration documenting the environmental threat. His academic credentials lent scientific legitimacy to what might otherwise be dismissed as local opposition or traditional beliefs. Meanwhile, on the reservation, Nanton faced the tribal council in their modest government building. 5 elected representatives sat behind a simple wooden table, their expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. "You come to us. With stories of hidden springs while our people haul water in trucks, Councilwoman Sarah Whitecloud stated flatly, Phoenix Water Holdings offers jobs, revenue, regular supply. They offer temporary relief while destroying permanent sources. Nantan countered. Council Chairman Robert Eagle presented official documents. Their environmental impact study, approved by state authorities. No significant risk identified. Their study deliberately ignores the underground system, Nantan argued. The contamination has already begun. Your evidence? Coming with Dr. Crane to Santa Dolores this afternoon. Scientific samples confirming petroleum contamination in ancient water sources. Councilman James Redhouse, the youngest member, leaned forward. You expect us to reject guaranteed water deliveries based on samples we haven't seen, collected by a white academic we don't know? I expect you to protect water that has sustained our people through 1,000 years of drought cycles, Nantan replied evenly. Water that will remain when corporations have extracted their profit and departed. The council deliberated briefly before Chairman Eagle delivered their decision. We will send 2 representatives to Santa Dolores to examine this evidence. The council makes no commitment until we've evaluated all claims personally. It wasn't the full support Nantan had hoped for, but it was more than the outright rejection he had feared. As he left the tribal offices, he noticed Phoenix Water Holdings. Vehicles parked outside company representatives, already lobbying council members individually. The confluence of forces was set. By sunset, Santa Dolores Chapel would become the unlikely battleground for the region's water future. Santa Dolores Chapel had never hosted such a divided congregation. By mid-afternoon, its modest pews overflowed. With an unlikely assembly ranchers in weathered hats, tribal members in varied attire reflecting different relationships to tradition, chapel regulars clutching rosaries, and suited representatives from Phoenix Water Holdings flanked by technical experts carrying laptops and glossy presentation materials. Father Ignacio had arranged a simple wooden table at the front, where the altar would normally stand. Upon it, Elias had carefully organized their evidence water samples in labeled vials, the Jesuit cross, the ancient star map, and printouts. Of contamination data, he had prepared using the chapel's aging computer. The corporate team set up a projection screen on the opposite side, creating a visual division that mirrored the community's split allegiances. Their lead representative, Michael Reynolds, exuded practiced confidence in his tailored suit and carefully modulated voice as he greeted arrivals with firm handshakes and unwavering eye contact. Nantan arrived with 2 tribal council representatives, Chairman Eagle and the skeptical young Councilman Redhouse. Their entrance shifted the room's energy, conversations pausing as attendees recognized the significance of their presence. Let us begin with prayer, Father Ignacio suggested, attempting to establish neutral ground. Reynolds nodded agreeably. Of course, Father. Though perhaps we should wait for the county commissioner? We've been informed he's en route. We've waited. Long enough, Jacob Miller interjected, the rancher's patience visibly thin. Some of us have stopped dying of thirst while we talk. Father Ignacio offered a brief, inclusive prayer that acknowledged diverse spiritual traditions while emphasizing shared dependence on water. As Amen echoed through the chapel, Reynolds immediately stepped forward, seizing the initiative. Friends and neighbors, he began, his voice projecting professional warmth. Phoenix Water Holdings understands the unprecedented challenges facing this community. That's why we've developed a comprehensive water management solution that addresses both immediate needs and long-term sustainability. His presentation unfolded with polished efficiency slides showing drilling technology designed to minimize environmental impact, graphs depicting promised water deliveries to communities, architectural renderings of a proposed water treatment facility offering jobs and economic development. Our environmental impact studies, approved by state regulatory agencies, confirm that our operations pose no threat to existing water resources, Reynolds continued smoothly. In fact, our advanced extraction methods will access previously untapped, deep aquifer reserves, creating new water availability during this unprecedented drought. Throughout the presentation, Elias observed with academic detachment, noting the careful framing of extraction as creation and the strategic emphasis on short-term benefits over long-term consequences. Beside him, Nanton remained impassive, though his fingers tightened incrementally around the stone carving tools he held, tangible connection to his grandfather's legacy. When Reynolds concluded, the chapel briefly filled with scattered applause from those most desperate for immediate solutions. He smiled confidently before gesturing toward Elias and Nanton. We understand there are alternative perspectives to consider. In the interest of transparent community dialogue, we've agreed to hear these concerns before proceeding to the signing ceremony for our water development agreement. Father Ignacio nodded to Elias, who approached the front with deliberate calm. The transition from academic presentations to community advocacy felt unnatural, but the urgency transcended his professional discomfort. My name is Dr. Elias Crane, archaeohydrologist from the University of Arizona, he began, his voice steady despite his still recovering condition. 4 days ago, I collapsed in this chapel, dying of thirst while researching historical water systems. Nanton Stonebearer saved my life by carrying me to a hidden spring unknown to government surveys or corporate explorations. He held up a water sample. This spring, which has sustained life in this region for millennia, already shows petroleum contamination from Phoenix Water Holdings drilling operations. Their environmental impact study didn't include it because they don't know it exists yet. It forms part of an integrated underground water system that connects this entire watershed. Elias unfolded the Jesuit map and star chart side by side. Historical records from both indigenous knowledge and Jesuit documentation confirm what modern hydrogeology is only beginning to understand. The water beneath us isn't contained in isolated pockets, but flows through ancient channels, connecting everything from Santa Dolores to the reservation and surrounding ranches. Reynolds interjected smoothly. While historical artifacts are certainly interesting from an academic perspective, modern geological surveys using advanced technology provide more reliable. Your surveys found water because they were guided by these historical locations, Elias interrupted, his academic courtesy giving way to urgent truth. Every major drilling site you've established corresponds to water nodes documented on these maps centuries ago. Murmurs spread through the assembly as community members processed this information. Reynolds maintained his composed expression, but his corporate geologist shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the technical accuracy of Elias's assertion. The contamination evidence is preliminary at best, Reynolds countered. Without peer-reviewed analysis, I've prepared chemical analysis using standard EPA protocols. Elias responded, distributing technical data sheets. Hydrocarbon signatures, matching drilling compounds used at your eastern operation sites, are already present in the spring water. Nanton stepped forward, his presence commanding attention without raised voice. My grandfather and Dr. Crane's mentor documented this same water system 50 years ago, predicting it would face this exact threat. The water that saved this man's life is the same water that has sustained all life here for generations uncounted. Chairman Eagle studied the evidence with growing concern. These contamination patterns match reports from reservation wells that we attributed to other causes. Precisely, Elias confirmed. The underground connections mean contamination spreads far beyond immediate drilling sites. The corporate legal counsel whispered urgently to Reynolds, who maintained his professional demeanor despite the shifting mood. Phoenix Water Holdings remains committed to environmental responsibility. If there are previously unknown water sources requiring protection, we're certainly willing to adjust operations accordingly after proper verification procedures. By which time irreversible damage will be done, Jacob Miller stated flatly. You? can't put oil back underground once it's leaked into water. The confrontation intensified as technical experts from both sides debated hydrological details. Community members began taking sides more visibly, some drawn to the corporation's promises of immediate relief, others increasingly concerned by the contamination evidence. As tensions peaked, Elias suddenly staggered, the lingering effects of his near-fatal dehydration manifesting under stress. He grasped the table for support. As the room momentarily spun around him, Nanton moved instantly to steady him, providing water from his personal container, the same gourd that had delivered life-saving drops days earlier. The chapel fell silent, witnessing this simple act of care that transcended the political divisions separating them. In that moment of unexpected vulnerability, Nanton made a decision. He stepped to the center of the chapel and began a traditional Apache water blessing. The sacred words he normally spoke only in private, now offered publicly in this crisis that demanded new approaches. The simple dignity of the ceremony created a space for reflection that technical arguments had failed to achieve. Even Reynolds remained respectfully silent, recognizing the emotional impact of traditional knowledge expressed with genuine conviction. When Nanton finished, Father Ignacio spoke into the contemplative silence. We face a choice between immediate relief and lasting protection. Perhaps there exists a middle path that serves both needs. Elias, recovered but humbled by his physical reminder of water's fundamental importance, proposed a compromise. The aquifer system has multiple chambers. Some could potentially support limited, carefully monitored extraction without endangering the primary channels, but only with proper mapping and protection of the core system first. Reynolds recognized the shifting momentum and adapted smoothly. Phoenix Water Holdings would certainly consider a phased approach with enhanced environmental protections, provided core business objectives remain viable. Chairman Eagle, speaking with the authority of tribal governance, established clear conditions. Any agreement must include independent monitoring, ecological restoration funds, and legally binding protections for traditional water sources. By sunset, an unexpected framework had emerged, a negotiated approach that acknowledged both immediate drought emergencies and the need for long-term aquifer protection. The corporate team reluctantly accepted increased environmental oversight in exchange for modified access to certain water reserves. Community stakeholders cautiously endorsed regulated development rather than unconstrained extraction. As the meeting concluded, the diverse assembly dispersed with something unexpected, a fragile consensus born of crisis and revelation. Phoenix Water Holdings hadn't surrendered its fundamental mission, but its methods would now proceed under heightened scrutiny and indigenous input. Outside the chapel, as stars appeared in the desert sky, Nanton and Elias stood in contemplative silence, recognizing both victory and compromise in the outcome. Will it be enough? Elias finally asked. It is a beginning, Nanton replied. Water teaches patience. What matters is that the knowledge flows forward, like the water itself. 6 months later, Elias stood beside the repaired bell tower of Santa Dolores Chapel, watching clouds gather on the western horizon. Beside him, Nanton applied final touches to the stonework, restoration completed with both historical accuracy and subtle improvements to water collection channels embedded within the structure. The National Historic Water Systems Registry approved our application, Elias announced, reading from his tablet. Santa Dolores and the connected watershed are now protected under federal conservation statutes. Nanton nodded, satisfaction evident in his normally stoic expression. The paper protection matters less than the knowledge protection. Indeed, much had changed since the confrontation at the chapel. Phoenix Water Holdings had maintained their presence, but operated under dramatically different parameters. Limited extraction points, mandatory water quality monitoring, and regular reporting to a community oversight committee that included tribal representatives, ranchers, and chapel community members. More significantly, Elias had established a research station in a renovated outbuilding beside the chapel, the Santa Dolores Center for Indigenous Water Knowledge. University funding had finally materialized when his near-death experience and subsequent discoveries generated academic attention. The center combined archaeological research with practical water conservation techniques, documenting traditional methods while developing modern applications. "My daughter arrives tomorrow," Elias mentioned, still adjusting to this personal reconciliation. "She's bringing her environmental engineering students for the workshop. The knowledge flows to new generations," Nanton observed. Their unlikely partnership had evolved into something neither had anticipated. Nanton led community education programs about traditional water conservation, while Elias provided scientific validation that helped translate indigenous wisdom into terms recognized by government agencies and academic institutions. Father Ignacio emerged from the chapel, moving more slowly now, but with the same determined spirit. "The forecast finally shows rain," he announced, hope evident in his weathered face. "The meteorologists remain cautious," Elias tempered, ever the scientist. "But yes, the pattern shows promise." The drought had not broken entirely, but subtle changes had appeared in recent weeks. Vegetation showed signs of recovery in areas where modified water management practices had been implemented. Monitoring wells indicated stabilization in the aquifer's declining levels. Small but measurable improvements suggested the possibility of gradual renewal. Maria Vasquez joined them, carrying the water ledger that now incorporated both modern measurement systems and traditional Apache water indicators. The chapel cistern collected 2 additional inches from the condensation system, she reported. "The new combination methods are working." The condensation collection system represented the practical embodiment of their collaboration Nanton's knowledge of how desert plants gather atmospheric moisture merged with Elias's understanding of modern material science. Similar hybrid approaches had been implemented throughout the community, creating modest but crucial increases in available water. Jacob Miller's truck appeared on the dirt road leading to the chapel, pulling a small water trailer. The rancher had become an unexpected convert to the integrated approach, implementing indigenous techniques alongside modern conservation methods on his struggling property. "The Phoenix Water Holdings Committee meeting is tomorrow," he reminded them as he approached. "They're presenting their quarterly contamination remediation results." The corporation remained profit-driven, but the negotiated settlement had established accountability mechanisms that transformed their approach. Remediation of existing contamination proceeded alongside more careful extraction practices, with significant financial penalties for violations. The tribal council approved expanded protection for the spring, Nanton added. "Councilman Redhouse is now our strongest advocate." As they discussed ongoing projects, the first drops of rain fell tentative touches against the adobe walls. Conversations paused as everyone turned their faces upward in shared recognition of what had once been commonplace, but now felt miraculous. "Not coincidence," Nanton said quietly, echoing words spoken months earlier at the hidden spring. "No," Elias agreed. "Connection." They stood together as the rainfall intensified gradually. Not the deluge needed to end the drought, but perhaps its beginning. Water droplets darkened the chapel stones and the surrounding earth, awakening scents of sage and creosote that had remained dormant through the long, dry months. The chapel bell rang, its resonance melding with the percussive rhythm of raindrops. Community members emerged from nearby buildings, gathering in the courtyard with upturned faces and extended hands, a spontaneous ceremony of gratitude that required no formal liturgy. In that moment of shared wonder, the artificial boundaries between academic and traditional knowledge, between indigenous and colonial history, between scientific and spiritual understanding, seemed to dissolve like mineral salts in fresh water, distinct elements becoming part of a single solution. Elias and Nanton exchanged glances of quiet understanding. Their work remained unfinished, the challenges substantial, the drought not yet conquered. But something fundamental had shifted. Like the underground currents flowing beneath their feet, invisible but essential, connecting past and future through the present moment where they stood together in the falling rain.